She wore a veil to the mating auction so no one would claim her until he lifted it himself. The auction hall smelled like too much perfume and borrowed courage. Nadia Ose walked in through the side entrance at exactly 7:43, 17 minutes before the doors officially opened, because she had timed it that way, early enough to find a corner, late enough to avoid the greeting committee. She had worn the veil. It was ivory, soft, and draped from a thin headband down past her chin. It was the kind of veil that covered a face without hiding a body, which meant she would be noticed, catalogued, and then passed over. She had done the research. 41 mating auctions had taken place in the city of Greyfield in the last 6 years. In those 41 events, a grand total of 3 veiled women had been claimed, 3 out of roughly 260. That was a rejection rate of 98.8%. Nadia was good at math. She had been good at math since she was 7 years old, sitting at a kitchen table in a small house in the east side of the city, adding up grocery totals before her mother could, just to feel useful. She had grown into a woman who handled forensic accounting for a mid-sized firm, which meant she spent her days finding the numbers that other people tried to hide. She trusted numbers. Numbers did not change their minds. Numbers did not smile at you on a Tuesday and then turn cold by Thursday. Numbers were honest in a way that very little else in this world was. The veil was a number. It was a calculated choice. It was the decimal point that changed the entire outcome. Her mother had called 6 times in the past week. "Nadia, you agreed, you promised, you said you would go." She had agreed. She had said yes because saying no to her mother required more energy than she currently had, and because part of her, a very small part buried under years of careful decisions, had thought that maybe going would be enough. Maybe showing up would satisfy the obligation. Maybe she could stand in the room for 2 hours, sign the attendance ledger, and go home to her apartment and her spreadsheets and the specific silence she had spent 3 years building around herself. The veil was how she planned to make sure none of that changed. She found her corner near the east window. From there she could see the entire floor without anyone being directly behind her, and she could reach the side exit in under 40 seconds if she needed to. She had counted the steps during her walk-in. She had also noted that the second row of chairs near the center podium had a loose leg on the rightmost seat, which meant if the evening became loud and crowded enough, that chair would become a liability. She filed this information away without knowing why she bothered. The hall was beginning to fill. Greyfield's mating auction was not the oldest of its kind, but it had become one of the most established. The institution had started nearly 30 years ago as a formal matchmaking event, something between a charity gala and a very structured introduction service. Over the decades, it had evolved into something more official. There were contracts now. There were legal claim windows and consideration periods and a proper office downtown that handled the paperwork. Attending did not mean committing. Claiming did not mean marrying. But it opened a door, and what happened in the 30 days after a claim was filed depended entirely on the 2 people involved. Most people came because their families pushed them. Some came because they were genuinely lonely and found the structure comforting, the idea that someone had chosen you specifically, in a room full of other choices. A few came every year without ever being claimed or claiming anyone, and those people Nadia thought were the wisest of all. They had found the loophole: show up, go home, repeat until the family stopped asking. She planned to join their number tonight. A woman in a blue dress walked past and gave Nadia's veil a long look. Not unkind, just curious. Nadia nodded once and the woman moved on. The hall held approximately 300 people at capacity. There were 62 women registered this year and 49 men. Nadia had read the registration summary her mother had obtained through a family friend who worked in the administrative office. She had studied it the way she studied quarterly reports, looking for anomalies, outliers, patterns that didn't match the expected shape of things. She had found one. Registered under the men's list, Elias Vance, age 32, occupation listed as independent consultant, Greyfield native, currently residing in the West Quarter, no previous auction attendance. His name had appeared on a registration form that had been submitted not by himself but by a secondary contact, which meant someone had entered him without his full enthusiasm. This was not unusual. Half the registrations in any given year were pushed through by mothers, aunts, or well-meaning friends. But the way his file read, sparse, almost reluctant, like every answer had been given with the least possible information, had caught her attention. She had not expected to think about him again after closing the file. She thought about him now, scanning the room. The women were arranged loosely near the left side of the hall. Some were dressed elaborately. Some were in quiet, understated clothes that managed to say everything without appearing to try. Two women near the center were laughing loudly at something on one of their phones, and the sound cut through the room's low murmur like a spoon tapping a glass. Nadia did not begrudge them their laughter. She simply noted it as a data point and moved on. The men had clustered near the bar setup on the right side. They were talking to each other in the way men talked when they were not entirely sure what they were supposed to be doing, with their shoulders angled slightly inward, and their voices carrying a little too much volume to be as relaxed as they wanted to appear. She found Elias Vance before she consciously decided to look for him. He was standing near the far wall, close to the door that led to the building's outer corridor, with one shoulder resting lightly against the molding. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that was simply physical fact rather than effort, and he was dressed in a dark jacket over a gray shirt with no tie, which was technically within the dress code but only just. His arms were crossed, not in anger. In the particular way of a person who is keeping their hands occupied so they don't do something with them. He was not looking at the women. He was not looking at the men or the bar or the elaborate floral centerpieces that the organizing committee had arranged on every table. He was looking at the exit. Nadia had a column in her mental spreadsheet. She labeled it Anomalies. His name went in. She turned her attention back to the room and tried to stop thinking about the way his eyes had catalogued that exit with the same quiet efficiency she had used on hers. The evening's host, a man named Jeffrey Alton who had been running these auctions for 11 years and had the voice of a man who considered himself extremely important, stepped up to the center podium at precisely 8 o'clock. He tapped the microphone once, twice. The room settled. "Welcome," Jeffrey said, spreading his arms wide, "to the 42nd Annual Greyfield Mating Auction." Polite applause. "Tonight, as always, we honor the tradition of formal introduction. We celebrate the courage it takes to be seen. We celebrate the possibility of connection. And we celebrate the contracts, legal, binding, and carefully constructed, that make everything we do here official and protected." More applause, slightly less polite. Nadia watched the room respond to Jeffrey the way she might watch a market respond to a press release, with varying degrees of sincerity and a great deal of performance. Tonight's event will proceed in the traditional format. Women will be introduced by their registered names. Men may raise a bid paddle at any time during an introduction. Any woman who receives a bid may accept or decline before the claim window officially opens. If a bid is declined, the bidder does not have standing. If a bid is accepted, the 30-day consideration period begins at midnight tonight. He paused for effect. Let the evening begin. The first several introductions went as Nadia expected. A woman named Claire was introduced and received 4 bids within the first 90 seconds. 2 women, both clearly there under family pressure like Nadia, stood at the introduction point with the fixed, slightly glazed expressions of people who were mentally elsewhere and received no bids at all. One woman had clearly spent a great deal of effort on her introduction, had rehearsed something, and delivered it beautifully, and the room responded with genuine warmth. Nadia tracked all of this from her corner. She did not track it because she cared about the outcomes. She tracked it because data was data, and watching patterns form and break in real time was the only thing keeping her grounded in this room that smelled like too many competing perfumes and the low hum of other people's hope. She was fine, she was absolutely fine. She just needed to be introduced, stand at the podium with her veil on, receive 0 bids statistically almost certain, and then she could go. She could walk out the side door at approximately 9:30 and be home before the news came on, and she could put this entire evening in the same mental folder where she kept everything else she had survived and did not need to revisit. The folder was getting full, she did not open it. She was so focused on her exit plan that she almost did not notice when Elias Vance pushed off the wall and began walking toward the bar. He walked the way someone walked when they were trying to look like they were going somewhere specific, but Nadia watched his path and it curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, away from the bar and toward the eastern edge of the hall where she was standing. She turned her eyes back to the podium. She heard him stop a few feet to her left. She did not turn. The introduction of a woman named Harriet, cheerful, well-dressed, clearly delighted to be there, was underway. Harriet was receiving bids, 3 of them. Harriet looked like a woman whose life was about to become much more interesting. "You're counting," a low voice said from her left. Nadia turned. Elias Vance was standing close enough to be speaking to her but far enough to be speaking to no one in particular if she chose not to respond. He was looking at the podium, not at her. His profile was composed. He looked, she thought, like a man who had very good control of his own face. "I'm watching," she said. "You counted the bids for every woman. You've been counting since the first introduction." She looked at him then, directly and without flinching, which was something she had practiced so thoroughly it no longer required effort. He turned his head slightly and met her eyes through the ivory fabric of the veil. "Most people call it paying attention," she said. "Most people paying attention look interested. You look like you're taking inventory." She held his gaze for a moment. "What are you doing over here?" "Avoiding Jeffrey," he said. "He's been trying to tell me a story about his sailboat for the past 40 minutes, and I've run out of escape routes on the right side of the room." Despite herself, Nadia felt the corner of her mouth lift under the veil. She pressed it back down. "The left side has a direct sightline to the podium. He'll find you." "I know." He did not move. They stood in silence for a moment. At the podium, Jeffrey was launching into a description of the next woman to be introduced. "You read the contract," Elias said. "It was not a question." Nadia looked at him. "Everyone gets the contract. Not everyone reads it." "Did you?" He turned toward her fully then, and she noticed that his arms had uncrossed at some point and were now simply at his sides, which was a more open posture than she expected from someone who had been carrying such deliberate tension all evening. "Clause 7C, he said. "The consideration period can be paused, not ended, paused if both parties file a mutual extension within the first 72 hours. Nadia stared at him. "Nobody uses it," he said. "There's no record of it ever being invoked, but it's there." "I read Clause 7C, she said. "I highlighted it." Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A small thing like a door opening 1 inch. "Of course you did," he said quietly, and there was no mockery in it. None at all. She turned back to the podium. Her name would come soon. She had been assigned Lot 7, she knew this from the registration packet. She had approximately 12 minutes left, by her estimate, before Jeffrey would call for her. 12 minutes was enough time to establish that this conversation was a coincidence. That this man, who had noticed she was counting, who had read Clause 7C and highlighted nothing but remembered it anyway, who smelled faintly of something clean and unremarkable, and had eyes that did not look away when she looked back at them. He was just a person who had avoided Jeffrey Alton and happened to find the same corner. That was all. 12 minutes was also, she was beginning to understand, enough time for something to go wrong with a very good plan. She stood in her corner and watched Harriet walk off the podium beaming, and she told herself that the math was still on her side. 98.8%. The numbers did not lie. She believed that right up until Jeffrey Alton cleared his throat, consulted his list, and said into the microphone, "And now Lot 7, the veiled lady." The room shifted. She felt it before she heard it, a slight collective turn, a reorientation of attention. Veiled women were not common at these events, they were noticed. They were discussed in the way that anything slightly unusual was discussed in a room full of people who had come, whatever they might tell themselves, looking for something. Nadia walked to the podium. Her footsteps were quiet on the polished floor. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at a fixed point above Jeffrey's left shoulder, a spot on the back wall where the paint had a small imperfection, a faint ridge where 2 layers had met unevenly. She focused on that imperfection and stood with her hands still at her sides. Jeffrey smiled the smile of a man who found this slightly theatrical. "Nadia Osei," he said, "registered by family submission, forensic accountant, Grayfield resident, 28 years old." He waited. Silence. This was the part of the plan that worked. This was the 98.8% at work. She could feel the room's attention sliding off her like water off glass. The veil was doing what the veil was supposed to do. She let out a breath. And then a paddle went up. She did not blink. She did not move. She stared at her fixed point above Jeffrey's shoulder and felt the room shift again, this time with the specific charge of surprise. "We have a bid," Jeffrey said, and he sounded pleased. Another paddle from a different direction. Nadia felt something cold move through her chest. Not panic, not yet, but the early architecture of panic, the first quiet beam going up. 2 bids, Jeffrey said. He sounded genuinely delighted now. He loved this. She did not look at either bidder. She did not let her eyes move from the imperfection on the back wall. 2 bids. 2 bids was outside the model. 2 bids changed the probability distribution in ways she had not prepared for. Then she heard the 3rd bid called out, and she recognized the voice, and the cold thing in her chest stopped being the architecture of panic and became something else entirely. She knew that voice. She had heard it at a dinner she had not wanted to attend 3 years ago, at a table she had sat at because her ex-husband had told her it would be fine and she had believed him. She had spent a very long time learning not to believe things just because someone said they would be fine. Her hands at her sides were completely still. She was proud of that. She was furious at herself for needing to be proud of it. Jeffrey was saying something about what happened when there were multiple bids. His voice was coming through clearly, but she was only catching every 3rd word. And then, from somewhere on the left side of the hall, from the direction of a particular east-facing corner, a 4th paddle went up. She found the imperfection on the back wall, and she held on to it. The numbers, she thought, had lied. Outside, through the tall windows of the hall, Greyfield's lights went on as the evening deepened. Cars passed. A bus turned a corner. The world moved on the way the world did, indifferent and unhurried, while inside the hall a woman in an ivory veil stood at a podium and tried to remember why she had thought math could protect her from everything. It was a good plan, she had been certain of it. Standing there under the weight of 4 paddles and the hum of a room that was paying close attention, she let herself feel, just for one flat, unblinking second, how much she hated being wrong. Then she folded that second up and put it in the folder with everything else. She was not done yet. The bidding for Nadia lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She knew because she counted. She had developed the habit of counting time the way other people develop the habit of deep breathing. It was rhythmic, it was grounding, and it gave her mind something precise to do when the rest of her was trying to go somewhere she did not want it to go. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, 252 seconds. She reached the end of the count just as Jeffrey Alton tapped the podium twice and announced, with obvious satisfaction, that Lot 7 had been resolved. Resolved as if she were a dispute. She was guided off the podium by a woman with a clipboard who was part of the organizing team, and who had the practiced kindness of someone who had done this 41 times, and had learned that the women needed a moment after the floor. They were taken to a side room behind the main hall, a small, softly lit space with padded chairs, and a table with water and the kind of pre-packaged biscuits that appeared at every formal event Nadia had ever attended, regardless of the occasion. She sat, she drank half a glass of water, she did not remove the veil. The 4th bid had won. She knew this because Jeffrey had made the announcement before she was guided off the floor. The 4th bid had been highest. The 4th bid meant that the 30-day consideration window had officially opened, and that the man who had placed it had standing to file paperwork, and that none of the other 3 bidders had any further claim on the matter. The 4th bid was Elias Vance. She knew because she had turned just once, just for a moment that she could not prevent, when the 4th paddle went up. She had turned and she had seen him standing in the east corner of the hall with his arm raised, and his face arranged in an expression that looked less like desire and more like someone who had just made a decision they had not planned to make and was not yet sure what to do about that. She had turned back to her fixed point on the wall. She sat now in the side room and thought about the fact that the man who had read Clause 7C and remembered it without highlighting it had just outbid 2 strangers and 1 person from her past to open a legal claim window on a woman whose face he had not yet seen. The clipboard woman came in and offered another glass of water. Nadia accepted it. She also accepted a biscuit, which was dry and slightly stale but gave her hand something to do. "You can stay in here as long as you need," the clipboard woman said. Her name tag said Patricia, and she had the look of someone who meant everything she said. "The hall will close for the main event in about 40 minutes. The claiming party will be directed to the formal introduction room once you're ready." "Thank you," Nadia said. Her voice came out steady. She was genuinely impressed by her own voice sometimes. Patricia left. Nadia sat with her biscuit and her water and the particular kind of quiet that filled small rooms after large events, and she thought about Elias Vance. She thought about what she knew, which was not very much. She thought about what she had observed, which was considerably more, because she had been watching him since she first spotted him near the exit, and watching people carefully was something she had learned to do with the same thoroughness she applied to auditing financial records. You looked at everything. You looked at what was there and what was missing. You looked at what people showed you, and then you looked at the gaps. Elias Vance had stood apart from every group in that hall. He had not worked the room the way the other men had, circulating with deliberate energy and the slightly too wide smiles of people running a campaign. He had planted himself near an exit and stayed there. He had come to her corner not to introduce himself but to avoid someone, and then he had stayed not because he was performing interest but because, and this was the part she kept coming back to, the conversation had made staying worthwhile. He had noticed she was counting, that was the thing. People did not notice that. She had stood in rooms for years and counted and catalogued, and no one had ever called it out, because people generally assumed that a woman standing quietly near a wall was simply being quiet. They did not assume she was building a model of the room in her head. They did not think to ask. He had asked, and then he had raised his paddle, and she did not know what to do with that, so she sat in the side room with a stale biscuit and tried to decide whether she was going to be angry about it. She was going to be angry about it, that was fine. Anger was manageable. Anger was a known quantity with predictable properties. It kept her head clear and her hands steady, and it made the next step obvious, which was to walk into that formal introduction room and make it very clear to Elias Vance that whatever he thought had just happened, he was mistaken. She stood up, she finished her water, she left the biscuit. The formal introduction room was down a short corridor from the main hall, fitted with 2 chairs facing each other across a low table, with a small window that looked out onto the building's side garden. The garden was dark now, but someone had lit a pathway lamp at the entrance, and she could see the shapes of hedges and what might have been a stone bench. Elias was already there. He was standing by the window when she came in, hands in his pockets, looking at the dark garden. He turned when she entered, and for a moment they simply regarded each other, the man who had just done something impulsive and expensive, and the woman in the ivory veil who had a data set that said this was not supposed to happen. "You can sit," he said. "I know," she said, and sat anyway, because she had decided to and not because he had suggested it. He sat across from her. The table between them was small, 2 feet of polished wood with a vase of flowers in the center that she immediately recognized as covering a slightly uneven surface. Someone had put a folded card under one leg to compensate, and it was not quite working. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. I had a plan. I could tell." She looked at him, then why? Elias leaned back in his chair. He had, she noticed, very good posture without appearing to work at it, the kind that came from years of not thinking about it, which meant it had been instilled early. "The 3rd bid," he said, "the one before mine." She said nothing. "I recognized the name when Jeffrey read the paddle registration," he said. "I was close enough to hear it. I don't know you, but I know a few things about that name, and I know what the look on a person's face means when they've heard something they didn't want to hear and they're trying very hard not to show it." She held herself very still. "You didn't breathe for about 4 seconds, he said, after the 3rd bid just stopped, and then you found your fixed point again and kept going." He paused. "I noticed you had a fixed point on the back wall. You were watching me. You were watching everyone, it seemed fair." She felt something in her chest do something she did not have a word for, so she did not try to name it. "This doesn't mean anything," she said. "The claim window is open. You have standing. But I have the right to void any claim within the first 24 hours without." "I know," he said. "I read the contract." Clause 4A. Clause 4A, he confirmed. She looked at him across the small table with the uneven leg and the flowers she had already forgotten the name of, and she tried to find the model that made sense of Elias Vance. She had a lot of models. She was very good at models. None of them were fitting cleanly. "Why did you read the contract?" she asked. "Because someone registered me without fully asking first, and I believe in knowing what I've been put in the middle of." He tilted his head slightly. "Why did you read it?" "Because I believe in knowing what I've agreed to." "Are those the same thing?" She thought about it. "No," she said, "but they end in the same place." "Which is?" sitting in a room with a veil on, knowing exactly which clauses apply. The smallest thing happened to the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the idea of one, she filed it away. The corridor outside the room went quiet as the main hall wrapped up its final introductions. Through the window, the garden lamp flickered once and held. "I'm going to invoke Clause 4A, she said. "I'll file it tomorrow." He nodded. "That's your right." "It is. Do you want me to contest it?" She looked at him. "Can you contest it?" "No," he said. "Clause 4A is unilateral." "I'm asking if you want me to." That was a strange question. She turned it over. She thought about the third bid and the 4 seconds she had not breathed and the fixed point on the back wall. She thought about the way he had said "of course you did" when she told him she had highlighted Clause 7C, and the way it had landed in her chest not as mockery, but as something that sounded oddly like recognition. "I'll decide by morning," she said. He stood when she stood, not as a performance, just as a reflex, which meant someone had raised him that way. She noted it without deciding what it meant. At the door she stopped and turned back. He was still standing by the table. "You said you recognized the name," she said. "The third bid." "Yes. What do you know about it?" Elias met her eyes through the veil across the room with the steady, unhurried look of a man who had decided what he was going to say and was going to say all of it. "Enough to raise a paddle," he said. She held that for a moment. Then she walked out. The side door of the building let her into the night air of Greyfield, which was cool and sharp with the particular edge of early autumn. She walked to her car. She sat in it. She did not start the engine for a while. She thought about the 98.8%. She thought about the 3 out of 260 who had been claimed while wearing veils at Greyfield auctions. She thought about what she was going to do when she woke up tomorrow morning, and whether the thing she did was going to be the smart thing or the other kind. She had always been very good at the smart thing. She started the engine. She drove home. She did not open the folder. Greyfield woke up the way it always did after an auction night, a little noisier than usual, a little more charged, with the particular energy of a city that had watched people make choices and was waiting to see what those choices would produce. Nadia heard it from her apartment on the 6th floor of a building that overlooked a small park. Through the window she always left open 2 inches at night regardless of the season, because she needed to hear the world outside while she slept. Not because it comforted her, because the silence inside 4 walls had, at a certain point in her life, become something she could not trust. She woke at 5:47, not because of an alarm. She had not used an alarm in 4 years. She simply woke, the way her body had learned to wake when the thinking that had quieted enough to let her sleep began moving again. The first thing she thought about was the Clause 4A filing window. It opened at 8 in the morning. She had until 8 in the evening to submit. 12 hours. She did not need 12 hours. She had made the decision walking out of the auction hall. She had simply not finished making it. The second thing she thought about was the garden lamp through the window in the formal introduction room, and the way Elias Vance had stood there with his hands in his pockets and said enough to raise a paddle. She got up, she made coffee. She stood at her window and watched the park emerge from the dark as the sun came up, and she thought about the file she kept in the bottom drawer of her desk, the one she had not opened in 2 years but had also never thrown away, because throwing it away would have been a decision about it, and she was not ready to make decisions about it. She was only ever ready to leave it exactly where it was and walk past it every morning to make her coffee. The file had a name on the tab, a case number. A set of documents that the court had put there 3 years ago when the case was closed, and the world had moved on, and Nadia had been expected to move on with it. She had moved on. She had moved to the 6th floor. She had built the silence and the open window and the 2-inch gap that let the world in just enough. Moving on did not look the way people expected. People expected it to look like recovery, like returning to something that resembled who you used to be. Nadia had not returned. She had built something new in the space the old thing had left, and the new thing was careful and precise and very, very good at forensic accounting. She drank her coffee. She thought about Elias. The problem with Elias Vance, and she was aware, at 5:50 in the morning with her coffee and her open window, that she was already calling it a problem, which meant something, was that he did not fit any of the models she had built for the kind of people she needed to be careful around. He did not fit the model of the charming man who needed something from her. He did not fit the model of the man who acted helpful until he understood what she was. He did not fit the model of the man who would look at the folder in the bottom drawer and find it useful. He fit a different model, one she had mostly stopped believing in. The model of the person who noticed you without wanting anything from the noticing. She did not trust that model, but she recognized it, which was different, and recognition was doing something she had not given it permission to do. She put down her coffee cup, she went to her desk, she looked at the bottom drawer for a long moment. She did not open it. She opened her laptop instead. The Greyfield Mating Auctions administrative portal was functional and plainly designed, the kind of website built by someone who valued information over aesthetics. She logged in with the credentials from her registration packet and navigated to the post-event filing section. Clause 4A was listed in the drop-down as a voiding option. She hovered over it. The second option in the drop-down was Clause 7C, the mutual extension. She stared at the screen. Clause 7C required both parties to file. It was not something she could trigger alone. It only mattered if both people decided, independently, to not make a decision yet. She clicked away from the portal without filing anything. She was aware that this was itself a decision. Not filing Clause 4A in the early morning was not the same as not filing it at all. She had until 8 in the evening, but she was also aware that the reason she was not filing it at 5:50 in the morning was not purely logistical. She picked up her phone. His number was in the contacts section of the registration portal. All claiming parties exchanged contact information automatically upon the opening of the claim window. She had noted his number last night without looking at it too carefully, the way she did with information she was not ready to use. She stared at his number. She put down the phone. She got dressed. She went to her office, because it was Tuesday and she had a case to work, a small manufacturing company whose numbers had been behaving in ways that suggested someone in the accounting department had been creative with the equipment depreciation figures. She liked this kind of work. The numbers were wrong, and she was going to find exactly where they had become wrong, and it was going to be specific and provable, and completely removed from anything involving auction halls or ivory veils or men who stood near exits. She was at her desk by 7:30, coffee number 2 in hand, the manufacturing company's spreadsheets open and waiting. Her phone buzzed at 8:14. She looked at it. A message from an unknown number. Not unknown, actually. She recognized the digits from the registration portal. It said, "I read Clause 7C again this morning." Nothing else. Nadia set down her phone. She looked at her spreadsheets. She found the equipment depreciation column and spent 45 minutes in it with the focused intensity of someone who was absolutely not thinking about anything else. Then she picked up the phone. She typed, "So did I." She sent it. She put the phone face down on the desk. The equipment depreciation figures were wrong by a consistent margin that told her very clearly that this was not an error but a choice. She began building the timeline. This was the part of forensic accounting she was best at, the moment when the scattered wrong numbers began to resolve into a shape, when the pattern emerged from the noise. She found it calming the way other people found music calming, or walking, or talking to someone they trusted. She worked for 2 hours without stopping. At 10:23, her phone buzzed again. His message said, "Are you going to file 4A?" She looked at the message. She thought about the equipment depreciation figures, which were wrong in a very clear and traceable direction. She thought about models. She thought about data sets with 98.8% confidence intervals, and the 1.2% that the model could not account for. She typed, "I haven't decided." He replied in under a minute, "That's an answer." She stared at that for a while. She typed, "What did you do this morning?" He replied, "Read the contract, made coffee, looked at the Clause 7C filing deadline." She typed, "What time does it close?" He replied, "Same as 4A8 tonight." She typed, "I know." He replied, "I know you know." She set the phone down again. She went back to the spreadsheets. She built the rest of the timeline, found the person who had made the creative equipment choices, documented everything in the clear, precise language she had developed over years of writing reports that needed to be read by people who did not want to believe what they were reading. She finished at 12:41. She ate lunch at her desk, a sandwich from the place on the corner that she ordered from 3 times a week because the choices were consistent and the packaging was simple. She drank a glass of water. She looked at the afternoon light coming through her office window. At 1:15 she filed Clause 4A. She closed the portal. She sat with the closed laptop for a while. Her phone buzzed. His message said, "The portal just sent me a notification." She typed, "I know." A pause, then "okay." She stared at that single word, the flatness of it, the lack of argument or persuasion or any of the things she had prepared to encounter, just "okay." She typed, "You're not going to contest it." He replied, "I told you last night, it's unilateral." She typed, "Some people contest things that aren't legally contestable." He replied, "Some people do." She typed, "You're not going to." He replied, "No." Another pause, then, "Can I ask you something?" She looked at her screen. She typed, "Yes." He wrote, "Was it because of the third bid, or was it a plan you had before you walked in?" She considered the question. She considered it for longer than she expected to need to. She typed, "It was a plan I had before I walked in." He replied, "Was the plan about the veil?" She typed, "The veil was part of the plan." He replied, "And now you've filed 4A, which completes the plan." She typed, "Yes." He replied, "How does it feel?" She looked at that question on her screen. She thought about the 6th-floor apartment with the 2-inch gap in the window. She thought about the folder in the bottom drawer. She thought about the fixed point on the back wall of the auction hall and the 4 seconds she had not breathed. She typed, "Like a plan that worked." He replied, "Okay." Then, after a moment, "I'll delete your contact information from my phone. The portal will remove the claim window data automatically at midnight." She typed, "I know how it works." He replied, "I know you do. I just wanted you to know I wasn't going to hold on to it." She sat with that for a long moment. She typed, "Why did you bid, Ilias?" The answer came after a pause long enough that she had set down the phone and picked it back up twice. He wrote, "Because the room was looking at you in the way that rooms look at things they don't quite know what to do with. And the third bid came from someone who had a specific look on his face when he raised his paddle. And I have met people with that specific look before. And I did not want that particular look to be the one you walked away from that hall having to think about tonight." She read it 3 times. She typed, "That's not a good reason to spend that much money." He replied, "No, it was not a smart decision." She typed, "You seem like someone who makes smart decisions." He replied, "I do, usually." She looked at the word "usually" for a while. She typed, "The portal will process the 4A at midnight." He replied, "Yes." She typed, "And you'll delete the number." He replied, "Yes." She picked up the sandwich wrapper from lunch and put it in the bin under her desk. She looked at the manufacturing company's completed report. She looked at the afternoon light. She typed, "What if I said the plan didn't feel the way I expected it to feel?" A long pause. He typed, "What did you expect?" She typed, "Finished. I expected it to feel finished." He typed, "What does it feel like instead?" She looked at that question on the screen for a long time. Long enough that the afternoon light shifted slightly and the room felt a different temperature than it had a moment before. She typed, "Like I closed the wrong clause." Nothing moved for a moment in the small, precise world of Nadia Osai's office on a Tuesday afternoon in Greyfield. Then he replied, "I'm going to need you to decide that before midnight." She typed, "I know." She put the phone in her desk drawer. She pulled out the manufacturing company's report. She read it start to finish, checking every figure, every timestamp, every sentence. It was a good report. It was clear and thorough, and it would be difficult to argue with. At 4 in the afternoon, she opened the administrative portal. She navigated to the clause for a voiding notification. She navigated past it to clause 7C. She sat there for a while. Then she filed it. The portal sent a notification to both registered parties. The mutual extension required both filings. The window for his side closed at 8. She had no way to know if he would file. She closed the laptop. She went to her window. She watched the park below, where someone was walking a large brown dog that kept stopping to investigate things the person had clearly lost interest in, and they kept stopping too, patiently, every time, and waiting while the dog figured out whatever it needed to figure out. At 7:51, the portal sent her a notification. The mutual extension had been completed by both parties. The consideration period was officially paused. She stood at her window and the park below her went on with itself, indifferent and unhurried, and Nadia Osei, who was very good at plans, who had walked into an auction hall in an ivory veil with a 98.8% probability of leaving exactly as she had arrived, stood there in the early evening light and thought about what she was going to do next. She did not know. She found, to her own great surprise, that she did not find that entirely terrible. Nadia told herself she had simply paused. That was the word the contract used: paused, not changed, not reversed, not fallen into anything, paused. The consideration period was paused and both parties had 30 days, minus whatever time they chose to spend in the pause, to decide whether they were going to do something with the claim window or let it expire. That was all that had happened. She repeated this to herself on Wednesday morning, standing in her kitchen making coffee in the gray early light, and she found it convincing for approximately the length of time it took for her phone to buzz with a message from Elias Vance that said, "Good morning. I have a question about Clause 14. She stared at her phone. She typed, "There is no Clause 14. The contract has 13 clauses and an appendix." He replied, "The appendix? I have a question about the appendix." She typed, "What about it?" He replied, "It lists the approved formal introduction venues for in-person meetings during the consideration period. There are 4 of them. Have you been to any?" She typed, "No." He replied, "I've been to one, the Meridian on Halson Street. It's very beige." She typed, "Most approved venues are very beige." He replied, "The committee seems to like beige." She set her coffee down. She had not smiled at her phone in a long time, at least not in the specific way that required her to look away from the screen for a moment first. She picked the coffee back up. She typed, "What's your actual question?" He replied, "If we're going to use the consideration period, which one would you choose?" She looked at that message. She thought about the word "we," which was doing a great deal of weight-bearing in that sentence, and whether she wanted to carry any of that weight, and whether she had already decided she did by filing Clause 7C the night before. She typed, "That depends on what the consideration period is for." He replied, "Getting to know each other better, according to Clause 3. She typed, "I know what Clause 3 says." He replied, "I know you know. I'm asking what you think it should be for." She considered the question. She typed, "Determining whether 2 people make sense together." He replied, "That's a good answer." She typed, "It's the accurate answer." He replied, "Are those always the same?" She did not answer that immediately. She took her coffee to the window and watched a man across the street struggle with a particularly stubborn umbrella that kept trying to open in the wrong direction, until he finally gave up and just held the unopened umbrella above his head, which did not help at all and which made her think about the gap between the plan and the execution. She went back to her phone. She typed, "Not always." He replied, "The Caldwell Rooms on Prentice Avenue is supposed to be better than the Meridian. Warmer lighting. Someone actually thought about it." She typed, "Someone sent you a review." He replied, "My business partner. He's finding this extremely entertaining." She typed, "My mother is finding it extremely satisfying. She thinks the universe has corrected course." He replied, "What do you think?" She looked at that question. She thought about her mother, who had been calling twice a day since Tuesday and who had the specific delight of a woman who had been saying for 3 years that Nadia needed to let the world back in, and who was not going to be gracious about being proven right. She typed, "I think the universe doesn't do course corrections. I think people make choices and other people make choices, and sometimes they point in the same direction." He replied, "And you think ours might?" She typed, "I think the fact that we both filed Clause 7C before 8 p.m. suggests something." He replied, "That we're both people who read the fine print." She typed, "Among other things." A pause. "Then, I'll be at the Caldwell Rooms on Friday evening at 7, if you want to determine whether we make sense together." She typed, "That's not how the formal introduction protocol works. There's a scheduling form in the portal." He replied, "I know. I filed it 40 minutes ago. You should have a notification." She checked the portal. There was a notification. He had submitted a formal introduction request for Friday evening at 7 at the Caldwell Rooms on Prentice Avenue. She typed, "You filed this before asking me." He replied, "I filed it in case you said yes." She typed, "That's presumptuous." He replied, "I know." She looked at the pending request on her screen. She thought about beige rooms and warmer lighting, and the particular difference between someone who asked permission for everything and someone who created the possibility first and let you decide what to do with it. She typed, "I'll confirm it." She clicked confirm. She went back to her coffee and the window and the man across the street, who had apparently got the umbrella to open correctly because he was now walking with it and looking pleased with himself in the quiet way of someone who had solved a small problem. She did not know what she was doing. She was aware of this. She was also aware that the awareness was not stopping her, which was new information about herself. The Caldwell Rooms on Prentice Avenue was, as promised, warmer than the Meridian. The lighting came from recessed fixtures and a collection of table lamps that someone had chosen carefully, and the walls were a deep, quiet cream rather than the institutional beige she had expected. There were 8 small tables arranged with enough space between them for conversations to stay private. A woman at the check-in desk confirmed her name and walked her to a corner table, naturally, without Nadia asking. Elias was already there. He stood when she came in, again not a performance, a reflex. She filed it again in the same column as before. She had not worn the veil. She had not made a decision about the veil exactly. She had simply stood in front of her mirror before leaving her apartment and looked at the woman looking back at her and thought about what the veil was for and whether what it was for still applied to this specific situation. And then she had set the veil down on the table in her hallway and walked out. It was still on the hallway table. She sat down, he sat across from her. This was the first time he had seen her face. She was aware of this in the specific way she was aware of things she could not do anything about and therefore chose to simply observe. He looked at her the way she had hoped and feared and expected and not quite managed to prepare for, with attention that was not performing itself, just looking. And then looking away, at the menu, at the table, at the room, the way a person looked away from something when they were trying to give it space. "You didn't wear the veil," he said. "No." He nodded once. He did not say anything further about it, which was the right thing to do, and she noted the rightness of it with the same precision she noted everything. They ordered, they talked. It started, as their conversation at the auction had started, with something practical, the formal introduction protocol, which had a printed agenda they were both expected to follow, and which listed conversation topics in an order that made sense for people who had never spoken before, and made less sense for people who had already discussed contract clauses at length at an auction hall. "We can skip the icebreakers," she said. Agreed. He turned the printed agenda over so neither of them would look at it. "Tell me something you're good at that isn't your job." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Most people define themselves by their work. I want to know something else." She thought about it. "Finding exits," she said. He held that for a moment. "That's a skill." "It's a habit, it became a skill." She set down her water glass. "You." "Reading rooms," he said. "Not exits specifically, more the temperature of a place, whether it's safe to be in." She looked at him across the table. "Did you learn that the same way I learned my thing?" "Not exactly, but not completely differently." He was quiet for a moment. "My father was a man who used mood as a weather system. You learned to read it because the forecast mattered." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "The folder at the bottom of my desk has a case number on it." She had not planned to say that. It came out the way things sometimes did when she was not guarding every exit. He did not lean forward. He did not change his expression to something kind in the deliberate way that people used kindness as a tool to extract more. He simply said, "How long has it been there?" 3 years. Have you opened it recently?" "No." "Good," he said. "Not I'm sorry or that must have been hard or tell me more. Just good, as in good that you haven't had to." She breathed out. The food came, they ate. They talked about other things, about Grayfield, about his work, which involved restructuring failing small businesses and finding the places where the systems had broken down before the money ran out. She found this interesting in the specific way she found forensic accounting interesting. Both were about locating the moment a working thing stopped working and understanding why. "You find the broken place," she said. "Usually in the accounting," he said, and then stopped, and the corner of his mouth did the thing it had done at the auction, the not-quite smile. "Usually in the accounting," she agreed. They stayed at the Caldwell Rooms for 2 hours and 40 minutes. At no point during those 2 hours and 40 minutes did either of them consult the printed agenda. At no point did she feel the specific anxiety she had expected to feel, the one that lived in her chest like a compressed spring, ready to release at the first sign of something familiar in the wrong way. He walked with her to the entrance of the building when they left. Outside, Prentice Avenue was quiet, a few people moving past on the pavement, a cafe across the street still lit up at 9:40 with 2 people inside at a small table. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You filed the request before asking me," she said. "I know. Don't do that again." He looked at her directly. "I won't." She believed him. She did not know yet if she was right to believe him. But she noted that there was a difference between believing someone because you had not yet had reason not to and believing someone because you were not paying attention, and this felt like the first kind. "There are 5 more consideration weeks," she said. "The pause expires if we don't file a renewal by Sunday." "I know," he said. She looked at the cafe across the street with the 2 people in it. She thought about the folder in the bottom drawer. She thought about the fixed point on the back wall of the auction hall and the 4th paddle and the word "usually." "You can file the renewal," she said. "Send me the notification and I'll confirm." He looked at her for a moment in the way he had looked at her across the formal introduction table, with attention that was not performing itself. "Okay," he said. She walked to her car. She did not look back, which was not because she did not want to, but because she had a policy about looking back that she had developed for practical reasons and was not yet ready to revise. The portal notification came at 10:15. She confirmed it at 10:16. She sat in the dark of her apartment with the lights off and the window open its usual 2 inches, and she listened to Grayfield doing its nighttime things, and she thought about the fact that she had just chosen to keep the door open. She had chosen that before, once. But the person who had opened it this time was not the same as the person who had opened it before, and she was not the same as the person who had walked through it before, and the world was, probably, not going to repeat itself just because she had let herself sit in a warm room with someone who read the fine print. Probably. She was a very good forensic accountant. She knew that probably was doing a lot of work in that sentence. She let the window in 2 inches of Grayfield night air, and she sat with the word probably, and she did not open the folder. That was enough for today. The 30-day consideration period was not, as it turned out, a countdown. It was more like a room that got furnished slowly, piece by piece, until you could live in it without noticing you were living in it. Nadia noticed. She always noticed. But she noticed the way you noticed good weather, not as a problem to be solved, but as a fact to be registered and carefully permitted. The second meeting was on a Saturday, 11 days into the consideration period. He suggested it and sent the portal request first this time, but he also sent her a message beforehand that said, "Sending a request, say no if it doesn't work." So he had adjusted, which was data she did not ignore. They met at the Langford Gallery on the east side of Grayfield, which was one of the approved venues, and happened to be hosting a photography exhibition that ran through October. The photographs were large format, all black and white, shot in various cities that were not Grayfield, streets and doorways, and the kinds of public spaces that looked different when seen through a camera's patience than they did when you simply walked through them. He was waiting outside when she arrived. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place on the corner, one of which he held out to her without asking if she wanted it, which should have been presumptuous and was not, because he had learned how she took it from a message she had sent Thursday about the coffee at her office being insufficient. She took the cup. "I guessed milk, no sugar," he said. "I said milk and half a sugar," she said. "You did, I misread it." He handed her the other cup. "That one's mine." "I take it black, trade if you want." She took the correct cup. They went inside. The photographs were good. They moved through the exhibition at roughly the same pace, which she noted because pacing was a thing that either worked or it didn't, and when it didn't it was its own kind of problem. One person always a step ahead, one person always having to slow down or speed up, neither of them quite at the right speed. They moved at the same pace. In front of a photograph of a narrow alley in an unnamed European city, he said, "My business partner thinks I've lost my mind." Why? Because I spent a significant amount of money at an auction on someone I had talked to for 20 minutes, and I've been distracted ever since. He looked at the photograph. He's also delighted. He considers it evidence that I'm capable of doing something without modeling the outcomes first. Are you, she asked, capable of it? He was quiet for a moment, not usually. But this time, the third bid happened and I stopped thinking about the outcomes. He turned from the photograph to look at her. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing yet. She thought about that. It's a thing, she said. You can decide what kind later. They moved on. In front of a photograph of a train platform in what looked like winter, she said, "My mother called me 4 times between Tuesday and Friday. She wanted to know everything." "What did you tell her?" "That I had met someone and that it was in process, and that she should be patient." "She wasn't patient." "She has never been patient," Nadia said. "But she loves me, so she pretended to be patient and then called my aunt and told her instead." "Did that help?" "Marginally. My aunt is slightly more patient by nature, but she has opinions about the mating auction as an institution, so the conversation took a different direction." She sipped her coffee. "What about your family?" "My mother knows. She's cautious. She's seen me make a decision quickly before and have to undo it slowly." He paused. "My business partner told everyone at the office, so my team knows. One of my junior consultants sent me a research brief on the mating auction's claim window success rates." Nadia looked at him and 63% of claim windows result in a continued relationship after the 30 days. She knew that statistic. She had found it herself. Of those 63%, she said, 41% describe the formal introduction period as the defining factor. He looked at her. "You researched it?" "Of course I researched it." Something shifted in his expression, that door again opening a little further. She kept her eyes on the photograph. "What's the success rate for claims that started with a veiled woman?" he asked. "The sample size is too small for statistical significance," she said. 3 cases in 6 years. "What happened to all 3? She paused. She had researched this too. "All 3 are still together," she said. He said nothing. He looked at the winter train platform photograph for a long moment. "I want to tell you something," he said eventually. His voice was careful in the way that meant he had thought about whether to say it. "You don't have to respond to it, you can just file it." She looked at him. "All right." "I looked up the court case," he said. "Not the details, just the record, the number. I found it when I was running background because I do that for anyone I do business with, and I was doing it before I fully realized I was treating this the same way I treat business." He paused. "I stopped once I realized what I was looking at. I did not read further." Nadia held herself very still. "You found the case number?" "Yes." "What year?" 3 years ago." He looked at her steadily. "I know it exists. I don't know what it says. And I'm telling you now so that you don't find out later that I was carrying information I hadn't disclosed." The gallery around them was quiet. Someone at the far end of the room was speaking in a low voice to a companion about one of the other photographs. A door opened somewhere, and a brief rush of outside air came in. She thought about disclosure. She thought about what it meant when someone chose to tell you something they were not required to tell you, and about the difference between that and the people who told you things because they needed to control how you found out. His posture was open. He was not leaning toward her. He was not watching her face with the particular intensity of a man waiting to see if he had said the wrong thing. He was simply standing there waiting. "There is a file at the bottom of my desk," she said. He said nothing. "With a case number on the tab." She looked at the winter train platform. "I've had it for 3 years. I've never thrown it away." "Why not?" She thought about it. "Because throwing it away would be like pretending it didn't happen, and it happened. It is a thing that happened." She paused. "The file isn't the problem. The file is just paper." "What's the problem?" She looked at him. "I'm still deciding whether there is one." He nodded. He accepted that the way he seemed to accept most things she gave him, without expanding it. without trying to make it into more or less than what it was. They finished the exhibition. They stood outside afterward in the October air on the east side of Greyfield, with their empty coffee cups and the quiet that sometimes came after something had been said. "Day 11, she said. 19 left, he said. Give or take. Give or take, he looked at her. I'd like to keep using them." She considered that. The 19 days, what could be built in 19 days, what could also break? "So would I," she said. She meant it when she said it. She meant it on the drive home. She meant it when she made herself dinner and sat at her kitchen table and looked at the folder she had moved from the desk to the counter, just to see what it felt like to have it in a different place. It felt the same. The case number looked the same regardless of which surface it sat on. She meant it when she woke at 5:49 the following morning and lay in the dark for a moment and thought about the exhibition and the winter train platform and the fact that he had told her about the case number before he had to. She meant it. She was aware that meaning something and trusting it were still different things. She was working on the space between them. 16 days into the consideration period, on a Thursday evening when the autumn rain was doing serious work on Greyfield streets, something happened that she had not put in any model. She fell asleep on his couch. She had gone to his apartment, a third-floor flat in the West Quarter that was neat without being deliberate about it, the kind of space that looked like the person actually lived there rather than dressed it for viewing, because they had been reviewing a set of contract addenda that the Greyfield Mating Auction Administrative Office had sent to all active consideration period participants. The addenda related to a legal review of the mutual extension clause that was apparently under scrutiny following a case earlier in the year, and while Nadia had read the addenda twice before the meeting and had her notes ready, she had also been running on 5 hours of sleep for the past 3 nights because a forensic case she was working had become complicated in the specific way that forensic cases became complicated when the person who had made the wrong choices started making different wrong choices to cover the first ones. She was tired. She was not the kind of person who admitted this. She admitted it once, briefly, around 9 in the evening when he asked if she wanted more tea, and she said yes, and then did not pick up her tea and did not turn back to the addenda, and simply sat on the end of his couch with her knees drawn up slightly and listened to the rain. She did not know she was asleep until she wasn't anymore. She woke to the specific disorientation of being in a room that was not her room, the wrong angle of ceiling, the wrong quality of darkness, the wrong sounds. For one terrible second she did not know where she was, and then she knew exactly where she was, and the terrible second passed. There was a blanket over her. She was still sitting up, more or less. She had tipped sideways against the arm of the couch, which had apparently been acceptable as a pillow. The lamp on the far side of the room was on, turned down low. The rain had stopped at some point. Elias was at the kitchen table on the other side of the apartment. He was working. She could see the blue light of a laptop screen and the shape of his shoulders, upright and focused. He had not noticed she was awake. She sat there for a moment. She thought about the last time she had slept in a room with another person in it. She thought about the specific quality of that experience, the awareness, even in sleep, of where the other person was, where the exits were. The way she had trained herself to sleep lightly, because heavy sleep was a form of trust, and trust was something that had to be earned across a very long period of evidence before it was extended. She had been asleep in Elias Vance's apartment for, she checked her phone, quietly, 1 hour and 14 minutes. She sat with that fact. She thought about the folder in the bottom drawer of her desk. She thought about the file that was now sometimes on the counter instead of the drawer, because she had been experimenting with putting it in different places to see if the location changed anything. It didn't, but moving it was still something. "You're awake," Elias said, without turning from the laptop. She looked at him. "How did you know?" "You breathe differently," he said. He closed the laptop and turned around. His face in the low light was composed, not alarmed. "I put a blanket on you. I wasn't sure if that was the right thing." "It was fine," she said. He stood up and came to the kitchen. "Tea," he said, and she could tell from the way he said it that he was giving her something normal to hold on to while the moment settled. "Yes," she said. She uncurled from the couch and went to sit at the kitchen table while he made tea. Her notebook was still open on the side table with her notes from the addenda. The rain had left the window on the far wall covered in slow-moving reflections of the street lights below. "You've been running on no sleep," he said. It was not an accusation. "The case I'm working on got complicated. Do you want to talk about it?" "Not the specifics, but the shape of it." She paused. "The person I was tracking through the numbers started making new wrong choices, which means the original wrong choices aren't the case anymore, the cover-up is." He set a cup in front of her and sat across the table. "The second set of wrongs is always messier than the first." Always, she wrapped both hands around the cup. Because the first set had a logic to it, however flawed, the cover-up is just panic in spreadsheet form. He almost smiled. "That's a good description. I have been looking at a lot of panic spreadsheets." They sat with their tea, and the rain cleared quiet outside, and the lamp on the counter that was doing an adequate job of warming the kitchen. She was aware that she had been asleep here for over an hour, and that she was not panicking about it, and that the not panicking was something she should notice. "I should probably go," she said. "You don't have to," he said, "not urgently." She looked at him. "The addenda." "The addenda aren't going anywhere." He paused. "You could finish your tea." She finished her tea. She left at 1:15. He walked her to the main door of the building, not outside, just to the door, which was, she thought, the right distance, far enough to matter, close enough to not make a project of it. 14 days left, she said at the door. "We should talk about what we want to happen at the end of the 30 days, he said. "I know. Not tonight." "No, not tonight," she looked at him. "Soon." "Soon," he agreed. She walked to her car in the damp aftermath of the rain, and the West Quarter smelled like wet pavement and autumn, and she drove home with the specific sensation of a woman who had done something very small that turned out to be very large. She had slept in a room with another person in it. She had woken up, and the world was the same shape it had been when she fell asleep. She parked and went upstairs and stood in her hallway for a moment, looking at the veil on the table where it had been since the Friday she had not worn it to the Caldwell rooms. She picked it up. She folded it neatly. She put it in the drawer of the hallway table. She did not throw it away, but she put it somewhere that required opening a drawer to find it. That was something too. Day 17 of the consideration period began the way the previous 16 had, with a message from Elias, with a message from her mother, with the routine of coffee and the window and the 2-inch gap that let the morning in. The message from Elias said, "Thinking about Clause 3. She typed, "What about it?" He replied, "It says the consideration period is for determining compatibility. We have 13 days left. Have we determined anything?" She looked at that message for a while. She typed, "What are you asking?" He replied, "I'm asking if you know what you want yet." She put the phone down. She drank her coffee. She looked at the park where a woman was walking a child by the hand, and the child kept stopping to look at things, and the woman kept walking and then stopping too, not impatiently, just stopping, and they would both look at the thing together and then move on. She picked the phone back up. She typed, "I know some of what I want." He replied, "What part?" She typed, "The part where this continues." A pause. "Then that's the part I know too." She typed, "And the part we haven't talked about yet." He replied, "What happened before the auction?" She stared at that, not because it surprised her. She had known this conversation was coming the way you knew a large piece of furniture was in a room even in the dark. You moved carefully around it. You knew its dimensions. She typed, "Not by message." He replied, "No, not by message. Can we meet today?" She had a case review at 10 and a client call at 2. She typed 4 o'clock, the Caldwell rooms again. He confirmed it. She went to work. She sat in the case review and contributed precisely and clearly, and did not let any of the morning's wait affect the quality of what she brought to the table, because the two things were in separate rooms in her head, and she had been very good at keeping them that way. The client call at 2 concerned a firm that had discovered a discrepancy in their payroll records and wanted to understand its origin. She walked them through it, methodically, without alarm, in the plain language that frightened people needed, and that she had learned to provide without condescension. At 3:30 she closed her office, stopped at the place on the corner for a coffee she did not drink, and walked the 4 blocks to Prentice Avenue. He was there before her. He had chosen the same table as the first time, the corner one, which she recognized as deliberate. The corner table was the one with the longest sightline to the door. She had chosen it for the same reason the first time without pointing it out. He had chosen it again for reasons she suspected were similar. She sat, she did not order anything. "I'm not going to ask you to tell me everything," he said. He was looking at her steadily, which was something she had come to understand was simply how he was, not an intensity meant to unsettle her, just the attention of a man who meant what he looked at. "I'm asking because we have 13 days, and after 13 days a decision gets made, and I want to make mine without information I don't have." "What information do you have?" she said. "A case number 3 years ago, you moved out, you built something different in its place, you have a folder you haven't opened in 2 years. He paused. "The folder isn't the thing that matters. The thing that matters is what you carry that's still open." She looked at the table. She looked at the vase, different flowers this time, orange and white. Someone had changed them. She looked at Elia's. "I was married," she said, "for 2 years." He nodded. He did not fill the space she left. "He was convincing," she said. "That's the word I've decided on. He was very convincing. I was 23 and I had just started my career and I was good at reading numbers and very slow at reading people." She paused. "He had very good reasons for everything. Every time something was wrong, there was a very good reason. I kept accepting the reasons." "What made you stop accepting them?" "Math," she said simply. "I'm a forensic accountant. I eventually started auditing the reasons the way I would audit a set of books, and the reasons didn't add up." He was quiet. "The case number on the folder is the result of what came after," she said. "The part that went through the legal system, the part that eventually closed." She looked at her hands on the table. "I was not badly hurt in the way people sometimes ask when they hear that a marriage ended through a court case. I want to say that plainly, because people often have a look when they're waiting to find out, and I would rather not have a look applied to me if it isn't accurate." "All right," he said. "What I was wrong about someone for a very long time. And being wrong about someone for a very long time when you are a person who is good at being right about things, that is its own kind of damage." She held very still. He did not say "I understand" or "I'm sorry" or the various other things that people said in this moment that were kindly meant and landed wrong. He said, "How long did it take to trust your own judgment again?" She looked at him. That was the right question. That was so precisely the right question that she spent a moment simply registering it. "I'm still working on it," she said. "Is that why you wore the veil?" "Yes. Not because of who might claim you, because you didn't trust yourself to know who shouldn't." She breathed out, "Yes." He nodded slowly. He looked at the orange and white flowers. He looked back at her. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Not because you asked, because you just told me something and I think it changes what you know about why I was in that hall." She waited. "My business partner, his name is Owen, he filed the registration. I knew he had. I let him because I told myself I wasn't going to do anything with it. I was just going to go and stand there and then come home and tell him it wasn't for me." He paused. "What I didn't tell Owen, what I hadn't told anyone, is that 6 months before the auction I had been going to ask someone to marry me." Nadia held still. "We had been together for 3 years. I had the ring, I had the plan, I always have a plan. And 2 weeks before I was going to do it, I found out that she had been lying to me about something important for most of those 3 years. Not something small, something that built a story about who she was that was not true." He looked at the table. "I didn't ask, I ended it. And then I spent 6 months being the person who was very certain he was never going to let himself be in a position to be that wrong again." She looked at him. "So when Owen filed that registration," he said, "and I went to that hall to stand near exits and go home having done nothing, I was also a person who had decided that being careful and being alone were approximately the same thing, and that this was fine." The afternoon light came through the Caldwell room's windows at an angle that made the orange flowers look almost amber. "And then you read Clause 7C, she said. "And then I talked to you about Clause 7C, he said. And someone who had made a plan and stuck to it through years of evidence suddenly felt like the most sensible person in the room." She was quiet for a long moment. "We were both in the wrong hall for the same reasons." "In the same corner," he said. "Near the same exit." He looked at her. "Nadia." She looked at him. I'm not asking you to stop being careful, he said. I'm asking you to let careful be something we both do instead of something you have to do alone. She felt something in her chest, not the cold, compressed spring thing that lived there most of the time, something different, warmer and less familiar and considerably more frightening in a way that was not, she thought, entirely about fear. She said, I need you to understand that I am going to keep auditing the reasons. Good, he said, I want you to. I won't stop just because it's inconvenient. I know. And if the reasons stop adding up. You tell me, he said, before the folder, you tell me. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the folder and the veil in the drawer, and the window that was always open 2 inches. 13 days, she said. 13 days, he said. She reached across the table. She did not hold his hand. She placed her hand on the table near his, close enough to be a statement, not so close as to be more than she was ready for. He did not move his hand. He let hers be what it was. She left it there for a while. Then she picked up her coffee, which had arrived at some point in which she had not noticed, and she drank it, and it was warm and right, and the amber light came through the windows, and Greyfield did its afternoon things outside on Prentice Avenue. That was all that happened. It was, she would think later, exactly enough. 9 days remained when the message came that Nadia had not expected, and had also, on some level below planning, been waiting for. It came from a number she did not recognize in the early afternoon of a Tuesday. It was brief. It said, I know you remember me, I'd like to talk, I know about the claim window, I think we should speak before it closes. She read it 3 times. She put the phone face down on her desk. She picked it back up, she read it again. The number was not one she had saved, but she recognized the pattern of it, the area code, the prefix from the district her ex-husband's family had lived in. The third bidder at the auction, his cousin. Oliver Hale, whose paddle had gone up with that specific expression on his face that she had clocked from the podium, and filed away as a reason not to breathe for 4 seconds. She did not respond. She sat in her office and worked on the payroll discrepancy case for 40 minutes with the specific focused intensity of a person who is not thinking about something else, and anyone who said otherwise was simply wrong. Then she set down her pen and picked up the phone. She called Elias. He answered on the second ring, Nadia. Are you somewhere you can talk? A brief pause, she heard him move a door close quietly. Yes, what's happened? She told him about the message, she read it to him, she waited. He was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you want to do? She looked at the folder on the corner of her desk. She had moved it from the drawer to the desk 3 days ago. She had not opened it, but having it on the desk meant she could look at the tab with the case number on it without having to do anything else about it. I want to not respond, she said. That's a valid choice. But I also want to know what he thinks he knows, she said, about the claim window. He could have found it through family information, Elias said. Your mother told your aunt families talk. I know, she paused, I don't want to meet him. You don't have to. But someone knowing, someone from that part of my life knowing changes something, she paused. I don't know what. It means the consideration period isn't as private as it felt, he said, which is different from it not being safe. She held that distinction, it was a useful distinction. Yes, she said. Do you want me to come over? She looked at her desk, the folder, the payroll case file, the coffee cup that was empty and had been empty for half an hour. No, she said, not tonight, but she paused. Can we talk for a while? Yes, he said immediately, no hesitation, just yes. She sat back in her chair. She looked out her office window at the street below, where people were moving through the early afternoon with their coats and their coffee cups and their particular Tuesday urgencies, none of which had anything to do with claim windows or old case numbers or the way a surname could arrive in a message and do several years of excavating in 30 seconds. Tell me about something you're working on, she said. He did. He told her about the small restaurant on the south side of Greyfield that he was restructuring, the family that had run it for 20 years, the son who had taken over from the father and had made 3 decisions that were understandable and 1 that was not, and the way the accounts told a story that was mostly about loyalty in the wrong direction. He talked about it the way she talked about her cases, with precision and without drama, and with genuine respect for the people inside the numbers. She listened. She was still on the phone 40 minutes later when she picked up the payroll case file and found the thing she had been looking for in it for 2 days, the point where the second set of wrong choices had diverged from the first, the exact date that marked the moment when cover-up had become its own project rather than a side effect. "I found it," she said, interrupting him in the middle of a sentence about the restaurant's supply chain. "Found what?" "The pivot point in my case." She ran her finger down the column. "The date where the panic started making its own choices." "Is it what you expected?" "It's earlier than I expected," she made a note, "which means the first set of wrong choices was smaller than I thought and the cover-up ran longer. So it was more fear than grade." She looked at the column. "Yes, that's exactly what it is." She made another note. "You're not bad at this. I've been reading panic spreadsheets for 10 years. "I know," she paused. "Elias." "Yes, I'm not going to respond to the message." "Okay. And I'm not going to let it change the 9 days." A pause, then good. She closed the case file. She looked at the folder on the corner of her desk. She made a decision she had not planned to make today, and had perhaps been working toward for longer than she knew. She opened the folder. She did not read the whole thing. She did not need to. She looked at it the way she looked at financial records she had already worked through, to confirm what she knew, to find the shape of it in document form, to feel the distance between the thing on the paper and the thing in her chest. The distance was measurable, not large enough to be comfortable, large enough to be evidence. She closed the folder. She moved it from the desk back to the drawer, but she put it on top of the other files in the drawer this time, not underneath them, not buried, accessible. That was where it belonged, she decided, not hidden, not displayed, filed. She had built her whole career on knowing how to file things. "Still there," Elias said. She had forgotten she was still holding the phone. "Still here," she said. "Are you okay?" She thought about it. She thought about all the things that question could mean and all the honest answers she could give. "Getting there," she said. That was, as far as she could tell, the truest thing she had said all day. 8 days, then 7, then 6. Nadia kept working. She always kept working. It was not avoidance, at least, it was not only avoidance. It was the fact that work was the thing she had always been able to return to, the fixed coordinate in whatever rearrangement the rest of her life was doing. The payroll case moved toward its conclusion with the methodical inevitability of all well-documented cases. She had found the pivot point. She had traced the timeline back to the beginning and forward to the present, and she was writing the report in the clean, honest language that had become her professional signature. She and Elias talked every day. Not always by phone, sometimes by message, the way they had talked since the first Tuesday, the back and forth that had developed its own rhythm, its own shorthand. He sent her a photograph one morning of the contract addenda spread across his kitchen table with a coffee ring on the corner of page 4, and the caption, "I needed a better filing system." She replied with a photograph of her own desk, ordered, labeled, a place for everything, and the caption, "I could consult." He replied, "I know you could, that's why I sent it." She saved that message. She did not examine why. On day 25 of the consideration period, 5 days before the window closed, Elias' business partner Owen called Nadia. She did not know Owen had her number. She picked up without checking the contact name because she was in the middle of a thought about the payroll report, and answered the way she always answered, clearly and without preamble. "Nadia Osai," she said. A slight pause. Then a voice that was easy and warm and slightly amused with itself. "I got your number from the portal registration. Both parties' information is technically accessible. I wanted to call before Elias found out I was calling." She sat back in her chair. "Owen," she said. "You know who I am. Elias mentioned you. Good things, I hope. He said you told everyone at the office." A pause that might have been a wince. "I did. In my defense, it was the most interesting thing that had happened to anyone at the firm in 6 months. His voice shifted slightly, still easy but more direct. "I'm not calling to interrogate you. I'm calling because Elias doesn't do this kind of thing, and he's done it, and I've known him for 9 years, and I know what his face looks like when something matters, and I needed to tell someone who wasn't me that it matters." She was quiet. He's not going to say that to you directly, Owen said. He'll say it eventually. He'll say it in contract clause language and careful sentences, and he'll mean every word. But I thought you should know that before the window closes. She thought about the ring in a drawer somewhere. She thought about 3 years and a wrong story and a man who had stood near an exit for different reasons than she had. She thought about accurate information and the different kinds of ways it could arrive. Owen, she said. Yes. Does he know you're calling? No. Are you going to tell him? A pause. He'll figure it out, he usually does. She thought about that. Tell him, she said. I'd rather he knows. A slight exhale on the other end of the line. That's a good answer, Owen said. I have them occasionally. He laughed. It was a genuine laugh, surprised and warm. He's lucky, Owen said. I think you should know that too. She said goodbye and put the phone down and sat with that for a while. She thought about luck, and whether it was something that happened to you or something you built, piece by piece, in the careful wreckage of what didn't work. She thought about a veiled woman with a 98.8% exit plan, and a man who had read the fine print and stood near a door and raised a paddle for a reason he hadn't entirely planned. She thought maybe both. The payroll report was finished on day 27. She submitted it at 4 in the afternoon and felt the specific cleanness of a completed case, every number in its place, every wrong choice documented, the shape of the thing fully visible now that it was done. She closed the file. She opened a new one. At the top of the blank page, she typed nothing for a long time. She was not sure what she was starting. She only knew that the blank page felt different than it had felt a month ago, not like an emptiness to be managed, but like a space that was waiting to be used for something. She saved it without a title. She went home. She stood in her hallway and looked at the drawer where the veil was, and then she went to the kitchen and made dinner and ate it at the table, which she had started doing in the past 3 weeks. She had eaten at her desk for 2 years. She had started eating at the table around day 12 of the consideration period, when she had been on the phone with Elias during her lunch break, and he had asked what she was eating, and she had said a sandwich at her desk, and he had said that was a crime against the concept of lunch, and she had thought about it and moved to the table. She had not moved back. It was a small thing. She had a folder full of small things now, small things that were different than they had been a month ago. She thought about Owen's phone call. She thought about the word lucky and what Elias would say when he found out Owen had called, and whether he would say it in contract clause language or the other kind. She was looking forward to finding out. The next morning, day 28, 2 days before the window, she got a message from Elias that said, "Owen called you." She typed, "Owen called me." He replied, "I'm sorry." She typed, "Don't be, it was a good call." A pause, then what did he say? She typed that you don't usually do this kind of thing and that you're doing it, and that it matters. A long pause. He replied, "He's not wrong." She typed, "I know." He replied, "I was going to tell you myself." She typed, "I know that too." He replied, "Did you believe it?" She looked at that question. She thought about all the times she had been told things, and all the careful math she had applied to those things afterward to find out which ones were true. She thought about 3 years and a folder and a veil in a drawer. She thought about the audit she had been running on every reason Elias Vance had ever given her, and the fact that the ledger was, so far, balanced. She typed a yes. He replied, "Good." Then 2 days. She typed 2 days. He replied, "Can we meet tomorrow, before the window closes?" She typed a yes. He replied, "Not a formal venue, just somewhere." She typed, "I'll find somewhere." She found somewhere the way she found most things, by thinking carefully about what was needed, and then going directly to the thing that fit. It was a small park on the north end of Greyfield, near a part of the city she had lived in years before she moved to the 6th-floor apartment. She had walked in it many times in a different version of her life. She had not been back since. She messaged him the address, and he confirmed it for the next afternoon at 2. She spent the rest of that day finishing a background review on a new client and doing the administrative work that piled up during active cases. She responded to her mother's message, which had become, over the past 4 weeks, considerably less about the auction and considerably more about Elias, because Nadia had made the mistake of mentioning him by name on day 14, and her mother had spent the intervening weeks extracting information the way a very patient and loving person extracted information, which was slowly and without any apparent pressure whatsoever. Nadia had told her enough. Enough to satisfy, not enough to fully hand over. Her mother was patient in the way of someone who had waited 3 years for her daughter to open the window a little wider, and was not going to rush the last few inches. Nadia typed, "Tomorrow might be important, I'll call you this weekend." Her mother replied with a string of response signals that communicated extreme satisfaction while pretending to be calm. Nadia put the phone down and smiled at her desk. She did not tell herself to stop. That night she slept for 7 hours without waking once, which had not happened in a very long time. In the morning she felt the particular clarity that came from a body that had, without being asked, decided to set something down. She got dressed, she made coffee, she looked at the hallway drawer. She opened it, she took out the veil. She held it for a moment, the soft ivory fabric, the slight weight of it, the thing it had been supposed to do. She folded it. She put it in the box on the top shelf of her wardrobe with the other things she kept that she no longer used daily, but did not need to pretend had never existed. Then she went to meet him. The park on the north end of Greyfield was smaller than she remembered. Most things were when you went back to them. The paths had been repaved at some point, and the old iron bench near the central fountain had been replaced with a wooden one, and the fountain itself was off for the season, a dry stone basin with a few leaves gathered at the bottom. She arrived first, she sat on the wooden bench. The November sky was the color of untreated wood, pale and even. The trees that ran along the park's perimeter had gone mostly bare. A few last leaves moved when the wind came through, making the particular sound of things holding on past the useful point and knowing it and holding on anyway. She watched a man walk his dog along the far path. She watched 2 children on a visit from the school nearby, moving in a loose cluster with a teacher at each end. She watched a pigeon investigate the dry fountain basin with the single-minded focus of a creature that had one job and intended to do it. She did not think about anything in particular. She had noticed this happening more often in the past few weeks, the ability to sit in a space without immediately inventorying it, without immediately building the model of the exits and the people and the probability distributions. She could still do all of those things. She did not always need to. She heard him on the path before she saw him. His footsteps were unhurried. He sat on the bench beside her, not at the far end. In the middle, the way you sat when you were not making a statement about distance. "You found a good one," he said, looking at the park. "I used to walk here," she said, "in a different chapter." He nodded. He did not ask which chapter. They sat quietly for a while. The pigeon decided the fountain basin had nothing for it and left. The school children moved along the far path in their cluster, one of them breaking free briefly to examine something in the grass, and then being retrieved. "One day left," Nadia said. "One day left," he said. She looked at the dry fountain. She thought about the conversation they needed to have, and all the models she had built for how it might go, and the fact that none of the models had quite accounted for sitting on a wooden bench in November with a man who also read the fine print. "I don't want the window to close as a formality," she said. "Neither do I. Meaning I want what happens at midnight tomorrow to be a decision we've actually made, not just the expiration of a pause." He turned slightly toward her. "What decision do you want to make?" She looked at the park. She thought about the folder, which was in the drawer in the correct place now, accessible, not buried. She thought about the veil in the box on the top shelf of her wardrobe. She thought about 7 hours of uninterrupted sleep and eating at the table and messages she saved for reasons she had stopped examining. She thought about what it felt like to mean something before you were entirely sure you were right to mean it, and then to keep meaning it anyway because the evidence accumulated slowly, but it accumulated. And 3 weeks of evidence was not 3 years of evidence, but it was what she had, and she was a forensic accountant, and she knew how to read a ledger. "I want to keep doing what we've been doing," she said, "past the 30 days. He said nothing for a moment. "Then what does that look like to you?" She turned to look at him. "Honestly, I don't know the specific shape yet. I know what it doesn't look like." "What doesn't it look like?" "Fast," she said. "It doesn't look fast. I'm not fast. I need to be able to audit as we go." "I know that about you," he said. And I need to be able to change the assessment if the numbers change. I need that too, he said, for the same reasons. She looked at him. He was looking at her with that attention that didn't perform itself, and she thought about Owen's call and the word lucky, and the question of whether luck was something that happened to you or something built from smaller materials than people generally admitted. There's also the part, she said, where I have never been good at letting someone just see me, without the veil or the plan or the model. I know, but I keep trying it with you, and the world doesn't change shape when I do. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Nadia, he stopped. He started again. When I bid at the auction, I told myself it was a reflex, an impulse, something that didn't mean anything beyond the moment. He paused. By the time I was walking across that floor, I had run out of ways to convince myself of that. She looked at him. I have spent a year being very sure that careful and alone were basically the same thing, he said. You are the first person who has made me think they're not. That's not a small thing. I wanted you to know it in plain language, not clause language. She held that, plain language. She had been given a great many things in clause language over the years. The things that came in plain language were rarer and considerably more difficult to file. I know, she said, and then because he had been plain and she owed him the same, you make the careful feel less expensive. I don't know how else to say it. He looked at her for a moment, then he reached across the bench and placed his hand over hers. She looked down at their hands. His was larger, warmer. She did not pull away. She turned her hand over so his was on top of hers and the contact was fuller, more deliberate. They sat there on the wooden bench in the November park with the dry fountain and the bare trees, and the faint sound of the school children somewhere on the far path, and she felt something she had almost convinced herself she did not need any more. Safe, not because anything had been promised or guaranteed or written into a contract, not because the model was complete and all the probabilities had resolved, but because the person beside her had shown up in the same corner of the same wrong room for the same right reasons, and had been patient with the audit, and had not once tried to make her move faster than she was moving. Safe was not a destination. She had learned that the hard way. But it was something you could feel in a moment, precisely the way you could feel a number land correctly in a calculation. And this was that. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he said. They did not discuss what they were going to file when the window reached its final hours. They both knew. They had both known for longer than they had said it. She walked back through the park when they left, taking the same path she had taken years ago when this had been her neighborhood and the world had been configured entirely differently. The path felt the same under her feet. The trees were the same trees, only older. The fountain was the same fountain, only empty for winter. She thought about the things that stayed and the things that changed. She thought about the folder properly placed. She thought about the veil in its box on the shelf, not hidden, not discarded. Simply moved to where it belonged, which was somewhere she could reach it if she needed to understand something about herself by looking at it, but not somewhere she had to look at it every day. She thought about what Elias had said, careful and alone were not the same thing. She had known that intellectually for 3 years. Knowing it and feeling it were, as she was discovering, two entirely different mathematical operations. She drove home in the November afternoon, and the city moved around her the way it always did, and she let it, without cataloging it. That night she called her mother. Her mother answered on the first ring, because she always answered on the first ring when it was Nadia calling in the evening on a day she had described as potentially important. Tell me, her mother said. Nadia told her, not all of it. The folder was hers, the case number was hers, the 4 seconds without breathing at a podium were hers. But the shape of it, the park, the bench, the plain language. Her mother was quiet for a moment when she finished. Then she said, "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like yourself," her mother said. "Like the version of yourself that I have been waiting to hear for a very long time." Nadia held that. "Mom," she said. "Yes, baby. I'm okay. Not getting there, not working on it. Okay, present tense, factual." The most important single sentence she had spoken since before the folder had a case number on it. Her mother said nothing for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was very steady, the specific steadiness of a woman who was holding a great deal of feeling in a very quiet container. "I know," she said. "I can hear it." They talked for a while longer about other things. Her aunt, the neighborhood, a cousin's new job, small things, normal things. The kind of conversation she had not been able to have with her mother in a long time because the normal things had a habit of brushing up against the other things, and the other things had taken up too much space. The space was different now. Not empty, not crowded, just properly allocated. She said goodbye and put the phone down and looked at her apartment, the 6th floor, the open window, the park below. She closed the window a little tonight, not all the way, just to 1 inch instead of 2. She thought, she would see how 1 inch felt. She went to sleep at a reasonable hour. She slept through the night. Day 30 arrived the way final things always arrived, not with ceremony but with the specific neutrality of a calendar page that looked exactly like the ones before it. The sky over Greyfield was clear and cold. Her coffee was the same temperature it always was. The park below had a woman in a red coat walking briskly along the path near the fountain. The park's fountain worked, unlike the one in the north end, and the woman's breath made small clouds in the cold air that disappeared almost immediately. Nadia watched her for a while. She had not yet opened the administrative portal. She had the claiming extension form, the one that would officially convert the consideration period into a recognized ongoing arrangement, saved in a tab on her browser from 2 days ago, ready to file. She had read it 4 times. It was a short form, 3 fields and a signature checkbox. She had been a forensic accountant for 6 years, and she could not remember the last time she had read 3 fields 4 times. She left it open. She went to work. Her last case, the payroll discrepancy, had been submitted and accepted. She had a new intake on her desk, a mid-sized retail company whose inventory numbers had a gap in them the size of a month's worth of stock. She began with the intake form, reading everything once, taking notes in the left margin, building the first layer of the model that would eventually tell her where the gap began. She worked until 10. She stopped and drank more coffee. She looked at her phone. No message from Ilias yet this morning. This was unusual. He had messaged her every morning for 3 weeks without fail, not long messages. Usually something brief, a clause, a question about what she was eating, a photograph of whatever was happening outside his window. It had become a rhythm. She did not message him first. She put her phone face down on the desk and worked through until 11:30. At 11:30 her office door opened and her colleague Priya, 2 doors down, corporate litigation specialist, the woman who had gifted Nadia with a particularly good plant when she moved in, and who had never once in 3 years asked her anything personal unprompted, stood in the doorway with a coffee cup and an expression that said she had a question she was deciding whether to ask. "Ask," Nadia said. Priya came in and sat in the chair across the desk. "Is it true the mating auction consideration period ends today?" Nadia looked at her. "How do you know about that?" "Your mother told my mother when they ran into each other at the market 3 weeks ago," Priya said, without any apparent guilt. "I've been waiting to see if you'd bring it up." Nadia set down her pen. "My mother is a deeply efficient person." "She is. She also clearly loves you very much, so I forgave the privacy breach." Priya held her coffee cup with both hands. "I'm not going to ask details. I just wanted to check in. Today seems like it might be big." Nadia looked at the window. The woman in the red coat was long gone from the park. The fountain was running in the clear cold air, and from here it caught the light in a way that made the arc of water look almost silver. "It might be," she said. Priya nodded. "Okay." She stood up. At the door she paused. "For what it's worth, you've been different the past 3 weeks. Lighter, I mean that as a good thing." She left. Nadia looked at her desk. She looked at the intake form for the retail company. She looked at the browser tab she had not closed. She picked up her phone. Still nothing from Ilias. She opened a message to him and typed, "Good morning, you're quiet." She sent it. She waited. Nothing came. She worked through lunch. She ate at her desk today, not at the table, because she was building the timeline for the retail case and did not want to break the thread. She told herself this was practical and not a response to the silence from his end of the phone, which was not a silence she should read anything into, because he was a busy person who ran a consulting firm and restructured failing businesses and did not need to message her every morning. At 1:47 her phone buzzed. She picked it up. His message said, "I went to the claims office this morning." She stared at that. She typed, "What?" He replied, "I needed to think. I walked. I ended up there. I read the claiming extension form on the board in the window for about 20 minutes. She typed and he replied, and I kept thinking about what you said on the bench, that you don't know the specific shape yet. She typed, I meant the shape of what comes after. I wasn't retracting. He replied, I know you weren't, that's not what this is. She waited, her hand on the phone was perfectly still. He replied, I've spent the last year building careful into everything I do, making sure I understand the shape before I commit to it, making sure the numbers add up before I move forward. I am a person who does not take the step until the ground has been tested. She read that. He continued, you are the first person since the ring in the drawer where testing the ground and then not taking the step anyway felt like the wrong choice. I needed this morning to be sure I was choosing it because it's right and not because I'm afraid to walk away from it. That's a distinction that matters to me. She sat with that for a long time. She typed, is it right? He replied, yes. She typed, you're sure? He replied, I went and stood outside the claims office in the cold for 20 minutes to make sure. I'm sure. She felt something in her chest unclench, not fully, but a significant and measurable amount. She typed, Elias. He replied, yes. She typed, I filed the extension form at 7 this morning. A pause, a long one, she counted it 12 seconds. He replied, you filed it at 7. She typed, I read it 4 times first. He replied, of course you did. She typed, and then I filed it. He replied, I'll file mine now. She typed, the window closes at 8 tonight. He replied, I know what time the window closes, Nadia. She typed, I know you know. He replied, I know you know I know. She almost laughed. She pressed it back, and then thought about the pressing back and let it out instead, quietly, alone in her office. His next message came a few minutes later, filed. Portal will confirm when both are processed. She typed, it'll take a few hours. He replied, I know. She put her phone down. She went back to the retail case. She built the timeline with the same careful precision she always used. This number, then this gap, then the question of what the gap was hiding. It was good work. The kind of work that occupied the foreground completely while something else resolved quietly in the background. At 4:15, the portal sent her a notification. Both extension filings had been processed. The consideration period had been formally extended into an ongoing arrangement per the terms of the contract. The legal status of their claim had changed from temporary to official. She read the notification twice, then she closed the browser tab. At 5:30, the last client of the day confirmed receipt of her initial intake summary, and she was done. She stood at her office window for a moment. The park was emptying out in the early winter dark, the paths lit by the small lights that came on automatically as the afternoon faded. The fountain was still running. It would run until the temperature dropped far enough that it became a risk, and then someone would turn it off for the season, and in spring it would come back on. She turned off her office light. She took the elevator down. She walked out into the cold Greyfield evening. She stood on the pavement outside her building and breathed in the air, which was sharp and clean and smelled like the city after a clear day. Her phone buzzed. Elia's portal confirmed, both filed and processed. She typed, I saw. He replied, how are you? She typed, I'll tell you at dinner. He replied, is that an invitation? She typed, I'll send a portal request. He replied, please don't. She typed, I know which approved venues are open on weeknights. The Caldwell Rooms closes at 9. He replied, we don't need an approved venue anymore. She stopped walking. She looked at her phone. Of course, the approved venues were part of the consideration period protocol. The consideration period was over. They had filed the extension. They were not in a formal introduction period anymore. They were something else. Something that did not require beige rooms or portal scheduling or any of the structures that had held this thing while it was finding its own shape. She typed, you're right. He replied, somewhere with better food than the Caldwell Rooms. She typed, the Caldwell Rooms has adequate food. He replied, adequate is a very gentle word. She thought about it. She typed, I know a place. She told him where. It was a restaurant she had been to twice, both times alone, both times because she was near it on the way home from a case and it was convenient. She had liked it both times. The food was good and the room was warm and no one had ever tried to talk to her there, which she had previously considered a feature. He said he'd meet her there at 7. She walked home. She changed out of her work clothes, something she had also started doing because Priya had once mentioned, gently, that going home from 12-hour days in the same clothes was a thing worth reconsidering, and Nadia had reconsidered it. She stood for a moment in her bedroom in front of the wardrobe and looked at the box on the top shelf. She thought about the woman she had been at this time exactly 1 month ago, standing in an auction hall in an ivory veil, counting steps to the exit, certain of her 98.8%. She thought about all the things that had happened inside a month that she would not have predicted and had not planned for and had chosen anyway, one careful step at a time. She closed the wardrobe. She went to meet him. The restaurant was warm and the food was good, and the room was the kind of quiet that was not empty but that gave a conversation space to be itself. They sat across from each other with no agenda items, no contract clauses, no consideration period protocol. Just two people at a table with good food and a window that looked out onto a Greyfield street where the evening was doing its ordinary things. They talked, they ate, they talked some more. At some point she realized she had not looked at the exits. She caught it, the absence of it, the way you caught something only when it was gone. She had sat down in this restaurant and she had not located the exits or the nearest door or the fastest path out. She had just sat down. She registered this, she filed it. Not in the folder, not with the case number. In a different place, a new one. 3 months after the mating auction, on a Saturday morning in February, when Greyfield was doing the specific thing it did in February, gray skies, and cold that was not severe enough to be dramatic but persistent enough to make everything feel slightly heavier, Nadia opened the folder. She had not planned to. She had been looking for a tax document that she kept in the bottom drawer of her desk, and the folder was right there, correctly filed, tab up, the case number visible. She picked up the tax document, she set it on the desk. She stood there for a moment. Then she sat down and opened the folder. She read it. Not quickly, not the way she had the one time she had looked at it the previous autumn, which had been more of a confirmation. Yes, it exists, yes, it is what I know it to be than a true reading. This time she read it from the beginning, every page, every numbered entry. The court record with its plain, procedural language that reduced years of difficulty to dates and case numbers, and the specific legal terminology that was neither kind nor unkind but simply accurate. She read it the way she read financial records, carefully, looking for the full picture. She finished, she sat with it for a while. Then she put it back in the folder. She put the folder in the drawer. She picked up the tax document and put it on top of the folder where it needed to be. She closed the drawer. She sat at her desk and looked at the park below, which was February gray and February bare, and still, somehow, the same park it had always been. The fountain was off for the season. She had watched them shut it down in December from this window, 2 men in work jackets efficiently turning off the water and covering the basin with a fitted cap that would stay until March. She thought about the folder. She thought about what it felt like to read it all the way through and put it back and not feel the particular weight that had been attached to it since it first arrived in her life. Not because the weight had disappeared, because she had, it turned out, gotten stronger than the weight somewhere along the way. She had not noticed when. She picked up her phone, she typed to Elias, "I read the folder this morning." His reply came quickly, "All of it." She typed, "All of it." He replied, "How are you?" She thought about how she was. She thought about it with the same care she brought to all important assessments, precisely, without hurrying, without deciding in advance what the answer should be. She typed, "Okay, actually okay, not getting there okay." He replied, "Good." She typed, "I wanted to tell you." He replied, "I'm glad you did." She put the phone down, she made more coffee. She went back to her desk and opened the intake form for a new case that had come in Friday afternoon, a family business, 2nd generation, 3 siblings with different ideas about the books. She began reading. The morning moved on, Greyfield moved on. The park below was empty and then had 1 person in it and then was empty again. At 11, Elias called. She picked up. "I'm working," she said. "I know," he said. "I have a question." What? Owen is getting married in April. He's asked me to say something at the dinner. He also wants to know if you'll come, because he considers you a person he has a responsibility toward after calling you without telling me. She thought about Owen, who had called her with information she had needed, and had told her to tell Elias he called, which was not the behavior of a person who wanted to stir things up, but of a person who cared about the outcome. Tell Owen yes, she said. Good, a pause. He also wants to know if you'll be annoyed at him forever about calling. Tell Owen no, she said, but tell him never to do it again. I'll pass it on exactly. She could hear the not-quite smile in his voice. How's the new case? 3 siblings and a shared set of books they all have different ideas about. Family businesses are always the most complicated. Because the numbers and the feelings are in the same ledger, she said. Is that going to be a problem? Not for me, she said. The numbers tell me what happened. What happens next is between them. She turned a page of the intake form. How's the restaurant? He was still working with the family restaurant on the south side of Greyfield. The restructuring had taken longer than expected, but was moving. He talked about it in the mornings sometimes. The father who came in to sit at a table even though he had officially handed things to his son, just to be there, because the restaurant was the place where his whole life had happened, and he did not know how to be away from it. He came in again yesterday, Elias said, sat at the corner table, ordered coffee, watched his son run the kitchen. Was that a problem? No, I think the son has figured out that the father being there doesn't mean the son isn't in charge, he just had to get there. A pause. Some things take the time they take. She set down the intake form. She looked at the grey February park and the off-season fountain. Is this still scaring you? She asked. Any of it? The question came out before she had decided to ask it. She did not take it back. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, not the same way it did in October, but yes. Me too, she said. Is that all right? She thought about that. She thought about what it meant when 2 people who had both learned to be afraid of the right things chose to keep moving anyway, with the fear alongside them, correctly accounted for and not in charge. I think so, she said. I think that's the version of this that's actually honest. Rather than the version where it doesn't scare you. That version has a design flaw, she said. She heard him exhale. It was a quiet, settled kind of exhale. I'll be over at 6, he said. I'll bring food. From where? Somewhere better than adequate. She smiled at her desk. That is a very low bar. I'm setting it low and clearing it comfortably. That's the strategy. Make sure there are vegetables, she said. There will be vegetables. I mean actual ones, not garnish. Nadia. I've been burned before. By garnish. By optimism about garnish. He laughed. She let herself listen to it, the real kind, unguarded, the sound of someone who was not performing ease but actually in it. 6 o'clock, he said. 6 o'clock, she said. She put the phone down and went back to the intake form and the 3 siblings and their complicated books. She read through the rest of the morning with the particular focus she brought to beginnings of cases, before the pattern was visible, when everything was still a question, and the answer was somewhere in the numbers waiting to be found. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, finding the thing that the numbers were trying to say in the space where other people saw only noise. She thought about the folder in the bottom drawer. She thought about the specific feeling of reading it all the way through and closing it and not needing to open it again today. Not because it was gone, because it was correctly placed. She thought about a woman who had walked into an auction hall in an ivory veil with a plan and a probability distribution and a fixed point on a back wall, and about how far that woman had traveled in the time it took Greyfield to move from October to February. She had not gone back to who she was before. She had not recovered the old version. She had built something new in the space, carefully, one piece at a time, in the way that you built things when you were also the one who had to keep standing in them while they were being built. It was not finished. Things like this were not finished in 4 months or a year or perhaps ever, but it was real and it was standing, and when she stood in it, it held her weight. At 2 in the afternoon, she sent a message to Elias, "Vegetables confirmed or I'm ordering separately." He replied, "The vegetables are confirmed and I am slightly offended." She typed audit pending. He replied, obviously. She went back to the three siblings and their shared books and the numbers that were going to tell her what had happened in the gap between what they all said and what the ledger showed. It would take time. It always took time. She was good at that too, at the patient work of finding out. The afternoon moved through its ordinary hours. The park below stayed empty, and then a group of children came through it with a teacher, the same elementary school from the North End. She recognized the jackets, and then the children moved on and the park was its February self again. At 5:30 she put the intake form away, she straightened her desk, she looked at the bottom drawer for a moment. She left it closed. She went to the kitchen. She set the table, 2 plates, 2 glasses, the proper arrangement, and she opened the window 1 inch, the way she always did, the 2-inch gap having become a 1-inch gap somewhere around December without her consciously deciding to change it. She stood at the window for a moment in the quiet of her apartment. The park lights were coming on below, the small steady ones that held the paths in amber circles through the winter dark. The doorbell rang at 6 exactly. She went to the door. He was standing in the hallway with a bag that smelled very specifically of something that was not garnish, actual food, warm and present. His jacket was the same dark one he had worn at the auction. She had never mentioned that she recognized it. He looked at her, she looked at him. The hallway was the same hallway it always was, with the drawer that used to hold the veil and the coat hooks and the ordinary light. Vegetables, she said. Confirmed and documented, he said. She stepped back to let him in. He came through the door and into the kitchen, already moving with the ease of someone who knew where things were and did not need to look for them. She had learned over the past months to let that be what it was, not a liability but a fact, the way all the things she had carefully learned to tell apart eventually became facts. She closed the door. She heard him in the kitchen, opening the bag, the sound of containers being set on the counter. The question called back to her about where the serving spoon was second drawer. She said, the one on the left, and his voice when he found it confirming this as a slightly unnecessary number of spoons, but she was a forensic accountant, and he supposed this made sense. She smiled at the closed door. She walked into her kitchen, where the table was set and the window was open 1 inch, and the food was being arranged with more care than it needed by a man who approached even small things with attention, and she sat down. He sat across from her. The food was good, the vegetables were real, the evening did its evening things around them. They talked, they argued mildly, about a point in the intake form she had described, and a point in the restaurant case he was managing, and then they talked about Owen's April wedding, and about her mother's plans to visit in March, and about a book he had been reading that he thought she would find interesting and probably infuriating in roughly equal measure. She ate, she listened, she talked. She looked at this person across her kitchen table, the one who had been in the wrong room for the right reasons, who had read the fine print and stood near exits and chosen to stay, and she felt the thing she had described to her mother in October. Okay, actually okay. The evening moved through its hours. They washed the dishes together, which had become a habit she had not decided to form but found she had anyway. She washed, he dried. This was the division they had arrived at on an evening 2 months ago when they had both reached for the same roll and she had handed him the towel and kept the water, and neither of them had discussed it or needed to. Habits were a form of evidence, she thought. Small repeated choices added up. The kitchen light was warm. Outside, the park was dark except for the amber circles of the path lights. Greyfield moved through its February night with its usual indifference, its buses and its pedestrians and its ordinary ongoing life. She stood at the sink and thought about the file at the bottom of the drawer, correctly placed. She thought about the veil in its box on the shelf, not hidden, not displayed, simply stored. She thought about all the small things she had built in the past 4 months, in the careful way you built things when you needed them to hold. She dried her hands, she turned around. Elias was leaning against the counter across from her with the dish towel in his hands and looking at her with that attention that never performed itself, and she held it for a moment, just a moment, the way you held something that you had not yet fully decided what to call but that had weight and substance and was, unmistakably, real. "What are you thinking about?" he said. She considered giving him the short answer. She considered giving him the precise answer. She decided on the true one, which was also the simplest. About how different February is from October, she said. He looked at her. He looked at the kitchen, her kitchen, with the table set for two and the 1-inch window, and the plant Priya had given her that was doing unexpectedly well on the windowsill. Better, he said. She looked at all of it, the room, the ordinary evening, the person in it. Yes, she said, better. She moved across the kitchen and sat at the table. He folded the dish towel and put it on the counter and sat across from her, and the February night went on outside, and the park lights held their circles on the paths below, and Nadia Ose, who had walked into an auction hall with a veil and a plan and a probability distribution that said 98.8, sat in the warmth of her own kitchen and understood that the 0.2% was sometimes the whole story. She had been looking for the pattern in the noise. It had taken October to February, and a man who read the fine print and the particular math of two people who had both learned to be careful, choosing, slowly and without hurrying, to be careful together. The evidence was in, the ledger balanced. She let herself believe it.